We're going to start off the course learning about layers first. And the reason why is because our course resources file is just one file, and that's the only file you'll need throughout this course. And I've organized all the chapters and lessons and all the artwork and illustrations that you're going to be using to practice with in this one resources file, and they're all organized by layers. So let's learn how to use our layers panel first, and then you'll be able to follow along as we go throughout the course. So to access your layers panel, come up here to Window and select Layers. And then just click and drag it over here, and then we can make it larger so we can see all the different layers that make up our course resources file. Now right now I have Chapter 1 expanded, and we can see there are different colors here as well. So what I've done is I've color-coded the layers in your resource file based on a color system. Anything with a red label is critical to mastering Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you take a look at all the chapters, most of them are in red, although they should all actually be in red. And the reason why is if you know your software inside and out, by knowing all the tools and which one is best for the job, you will be able to work efficiently and get your projects done faster. So layers are an integral part to your workflow. In their simplest form, layers in Illustrator are a way for you to organize the objects that make up your artwork. The more organized you are, the faster you'll be able to complete your projects and make modifications to your artwork. So by being organized, you will be able to easily find what you need when you need it, and have everything in a specific order also allows you to share your files with clients so they too can easily navigate the layers of your artwork. So this course was created with a lot of different layers and sub-layers, and they've been grouped by chapters and lessons. Within those grouped layers are even more grouped layers that make up the objects used in the illustrations. Without these layers organized the way they are, we would have over 100 files versus one file. So I did this for two reasons. One, you don't have to keep track of over 100 files. And two, so you could see how a file can be organized and structured with hundreds of layers. And by seeing this, you can better understand why it's important to use layers to organize and manage your objects. So in this course, we have 17 main chapters. Another reason why you might want to organize your layer groups by color is to help you easily identify different steps of your artwork. You could have one color represent basic shapes, another more complex shapes, and maybe another color for just typography, and so on. So it's up to you to decide how you wish to organize your layers for your own personal workflow. It doesn't really matter as long as it helps streamline your workflow. I would go even as far as saying keeping a color system that is consistent throughout all your projects. So for example, if you assign orange to typography, then use that in all your projects. It just keeps everything consistent. And if you do tons of projects for one client, then when you share your files, they'll recognize the consistency from one project to the next and will know that any layers with an orange color consists of typography or whatever you decide to assign for that color. So every time we create a new document, you start off with one blank layer. And every time you add a new object, like a shape or text or whatever it might be, it's added to that layer as a sublayer. So if we take a look at these chapters here, we have a main layer right here called the foundation, which is the main section. And then chapter 1 is the sublayer. And then intro right here is the sublayer of chapter 1. And then if we click on this little arrow here, we expand those layers, and there's additional layer groups within those sublayers, so on and so forth. And I've organized it this way to allow me and you to better navigate through this course file to find what you need when you need it. So for example, if you want to practice something, you know you can go to chapter 2, lesson 3, and you'll find the worksheet right there. And then you can practice right there without having to worry about finding the file on your computer. Everything is located right here, nice and easy to use organized by layers. Because let's say I gave you this course file, and let's say the objects and the practice lessons were all on one layer. Now imagine if you wanted to find the practice worksheet for chapter 10. Well, you'd have to scroll through hundreds and hundreds of layers until you found it. That's a great way to drive yourself and your clients crazy. So organized layers are an integral part of a fast and productive workflow in Illustrator. By organizing your artwork with layers, you will streamline your workflow and you'll be much, much more productive. So as we go throughout this course, we're going to be using this file to work on specific lessons, and within these chapter layers are your practice worksheets. Currently, every layer is active, or I should say, is set to be seen. So check out this little eyeball icon right here. If we click on it, that layer is now hidden and the layer below it is visible. So if I click on this chapter as well, then the one below it shows through, and we can see that because this one says chapter 3 now, and if we turn it back on right here, now we have chapter 2. So another thing to keep in mind is that layers have a stacking order. Anything on top will hide anything below it if it's larger than the object below it. If not, then it will partially hide the layer below it. So right now we have chapter 1 up here, and that's why we're unable to see anything below it. If we hide the layer, then we can see the next layer. So another thing we can do is we can also rearrange the layers to change the stacking order. So to do that, we can grab this layer and then move it to a new location. Now notice the white line as I move the layer. That is letting you know that when you release your mouse button, that's where it's going to be placed. All right, so now it's been moved into a new place. I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z, and that takes it right back to where it was. Now to move multiple layers, that requires selecting each layer that you wish to move. So if a layer is in a subgroup like these lessons here, and we decide we want to move them, what we need to do is we need to click to the right of this circle, and when we do, we get this little red box. Then we need to do that again for the other layers you want to move. Before you do that, you need to hold down your Shift key before you click. Otherwise, you're just going to select the new layer. So when you hold down your Shift key and click, you now have both of those layers selected. The next thing you need to do is you need to highlight both of those layers, and to do that, click on the first layer and then hold down your Shift key again and click on the other layer, and now they are both highlighted and selected, and then just click and drag into a new location. Now if it's not moving for you, you need to make sure that you click on the little thumbnail icon here in order to move it. All right, let's go ahead and undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z. All right, so throughout the remainder of this course, we're going to show and hide specific chapters so we can focus on the specific lesson that we're working on, and we're going to do that by activating or deactivating this little eye icon here. Plus, we need to unlock some chapters and lessons, and in order to interact with them, we have to turn off the lock. So if you see this little icon right here, that's the lock. If you click on it, that unlocks that layer. To relock it again, just click right here, and then the icon for the lock will return, and then you know that layer is locked. So any layer that is locked cannot be selected and cannot be moved. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to take a look at all the different options for our layers panel. All our layers in Illustrator have options, and each can be controlled individually. So let's take a closer look at the layers panel and the different options we can use to control our layers. All right, let's say we want to rename one of our layers. What we can do is just double click right here and then go ahead and rename it and click Enter on your keyboard, and then that layer will be renamed. Now let's go to the layers options, and to get to that, just double click to the right of your name. All right, so there we go, and now you can see we do have an option to rename our layer from here, but it is easier to just double click on the name and rename it from the layers panel itself. We can also change the color from here, and this color is for the color of your layer, and that color that you choose will also be represented when you select your object, and you'll see that your anchors and your paths will be the same color that you use to color your layer. All right, so we do have a template option, and this is used to help guide you. So for example, if you do web designs or other types of projects that require uniformity, then you can create a template to help guide you to place objects in specific locations. We also have another way to show and hide or lock and unlock our layers with these options, but I just find it easier to just do it directly in the layers panel. You can also set the layer not to print. So why would you want to do that? Well, let's say you're giving a file to a client and you give them a note about the project and they may want to print it. Well, you don't want that note printed with your document. So you can go ahead and turn this off, and then that note will not be printed. We can also set up to preview individual layers, and you can also dim images of a specific layer. So sometimes a project is very intense and detailed, and you may wish to focus just on a specific layer or layers, so you can dim the ones that you don't want to see from here. All right, let's go ahead and close that, and let's take a look at some other options. If you come over here and click on this little icon here, you will see a list of additional options. So some of these options are located in the layers panel itself, and it is easier to interact with them directly from the panel itself, but there are a few additional options here that will help you streamline your workflow. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So the first few options are basically to create new layers, but it's easier just to come down here to the bottom of the layers panel and click on these little icons down here to create a new layer or a sub-layer. And you can also use the trash can icon to delete your layers. So it's just easier to get those options from the bottom of your layers panel. I just find that easier myself versus coming over here and clicking on this options button up here. All right, so after that, we have clipping masks and isolation mode, and we're going to talk more about those in an upcoming chapter. We also have the option to merge selected layers or flatten your artwork. We also have release to layers, and this gives you the control to separate layers if needed. We can also turn a layer into a template from here. We can also select hide others, and this will turn off all layers except the one you've selected. But we can also do that directly in the layers panel. So let me show you how to do that. So if we hold down our Alt or Option key and then click on the show or hide icon, that will show or hide all layers except for the one that you selected. And that keyboard shortcut will work for the lock as well. Or if you click and drag your mouse, that will also turn off or turn on the selected layers as you drag your mouse. So it's just another way to control a series of layers instead of turning them all off or on. Okay, so outline others. This will make a layer not selected into an outline. We're going to talk more about this in an upcoming chapter. Next, we have paste remembered layers. So if you're working with multiple documents and you want to copy and paste a layer from one to another, you can use this option, and it's going to remember all the sublayers within it and all the objects so that it will paste into a new layer into the document you're copying to. If you just copy and paste instead, then the layer contents will be added to any layer that is selected in the new document. So if you want to keep everything together in one layer, then I recommend using paste remembered layers. And then lastly, we have panel options, which gives you the control of how you view your layers panel. You can adjust the layer thumbnail sizes. You can also view or hide different aspects of your layers. And then we have show layers only. And when you turn this on, you end up losing some of the control we've talked about. I really don't see any need to work in this way, and I just recommend leaving that turned off. So those are all the different options available for your layers. Some of them we'll talk about in more detail in upcoming chapters. All right, so understanding whether Illustrator is a raster or vector-based software will help you better understand how the software works and its limitations. All right, so let's discuss the differences between Illustrator and Photoshop files and which one Illustrator uses. So a raster graphic is an image made up of thousands and thousands of pixels or dots. And the most common type of raster graphics are photographs. So if we zoom into this photo, we can see that it's made up of these little dots or pixels. And the advantages of a raster image is the vast amount of detail. If you're familiar with the term DPI, then you know that means dots per inch. DPI is a measurement of how much detailed color information is in a raster image. So these pixels provide precise shading details in your photographs. If your photo has more than 300 DPI, then the subtle details will be more visible versus a lower DPI image. And there's another advantage to raster images, and that's on the individual pixels themselves, which means we can modify each one of these individual pixels one by one in Photoshop. We can't modify the individual pixels in Illustrator. However, one of the main disadvantages of raster images is they become blurry when enlarged. So the more you enlarge your photo, the more pixelated or grainy the image becomes, and that's because there are millions of more pixels in the larger photo size. And what happens then when you increase from, let's say, a 4:6 image to a 16:24 inch is that Photoshop has to add additional pixels that are not there, and your photo becomes blurry or pixelated as a result. Another disadvantage to raster files are that they are resolution dependent. If you increase the size of your photo, then you're also increasing the size of your file. The more pixels you add, the larger the file becomes. All right, now let's go back to Illustrator and take a look at a vector file for comparison. Unlike raster images that are made up of individual pixels, a vector graphic uses math to draw shapes using anchor points, lines, and curves. A vector file could have only 4 points. So if we draw a rectangle, the 4 corners are the 4 points. So we can see that it has an anchor point on each corner, and vector files are made up of these anchor points, curves, and lines. So the most common types of vector graphics are fonts, computer illustrations, and logos. The biggest advantage of vector images is the ability to scale the file infinitely. You can scale your file up or down as much as you want without losing any quality. Vector files will simply use mathematics to create a consistent shape every time you resize. And compare that to a raster image, which Photoshop has to guess the colors of missing pixels when resizing larger. Another advantage of vector files is a smaller file size. This is because vector files only use anchor points and math to connect them, versus thousands and thousands of individual pixels for a raster photograph. But there are limitations to vector files as well, though. Due to the mathematics used to create a vector file, the amount of detail is limited. They're not ideal for complex images that require specific coloring. So raster images have great color detail, but can't be enlarged without becoming blurry and have very large file sizes, while vector files can be enlarged without losing quality, but are limited on color and detail, and the file sizes are smaller. Preferences. Not exactly the most exciting lesson in the course. However, setting up preferences will help Illustrator work for you instead of you working Illustrator. It's going to help you streamline your workflow and be more productive by setting up your preferences ahead of time and knowing which preference settings are available to you as you work. Unlike Photoshop, the amount of Illustrator preference settings is much smaller. Some of them are set and forget, and others may want to come back to for different projects. That simply means that some of the preference settings in Illustrator are dependent on what you're doing. So let me show you what I mean. First, let's go create a new document, which is located here under File and New, and the keyboard shortcut is Command or Control and the letter N. Or if you want to just follow along, you can go ahead and open up the course resources file and follow along that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my rectangle tool, which is right here on my toolbar, or the keyboard shortcut is the letter M. I'm going to go ahead and draw out a rectangle, and then I'm going to go up to Preferences, which is Command or Control and the letter K. You can also find that under File. You will find the preferences in here if you're on a PC, but if you're on a Mac, you're going to go up to Illustrator like I am here, and you'll find preferences right here. But I do prefer using the keyboard shortcuts, which is Command or Control and the letter K. So once you have that open, you'll find the general preferences with these three options here. We have keyboard increments, constraint angle, and corner radius. We're not going to work with the corner radius for now. That's just adjusting the corners of your rectangle from perfectly square to rounded. But what I want to do is I want to increase the keyboard increment to 5 pixels for now. And then we're going to change the constraint angle to 25 degrees. So once you have that, go ahead and click OK, and then use the keyboard shortcuts on your keyboard, and then your rectangle will move in 5 pixel increments at a 25-degree angle. So depending on the project that you're working on, you may want to move your object in a specific amount of pixel increments, as well as adjust the angle at which the object moves. So that would come in handy, for example, if you send your artwork or your document to, let's say, an art director, and they say that the object is too close to the edge and it's not going to print very well, or it's going to get cropped off during the binding process, and they say you need to move it in 10 pixels to the right or down 10 pixels, but also you need to do it at a 12.5-degree angle. And that's what they recommend before you send them the final file for print. You now know how to set up your document so that you can change your keyboard increment options and your constraint angle. So that's an example of a preference setting that you're going to want to adjust during specific projects that you're working on, or in order to change things as you're working. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reset this back to 1 pixel and 0 degrees for now. So although preferences is a bit boring, just keep in mind that a lot of these settings can be adjusted based on what you need to do. This is definitely going to help you streamline your workflow. All right, so let's check out this section down here under General, right in here, and we can see there are a lot of default settings already activated for you. Personally, I leave most of the defaults turned on except Show Tooltips and Scale Strokes and Effects. You may want to leave the Show Tooltips on for now until you are comfortable with all the keyboard shortcuts and know where all the tools are located. Anytime you hover over a tool, it's going to display the name of the tool and the keyboard shortcut. So that's something I would go ahead and leave on for now. All right, let me explain why you might want to turn off Scale, Strokes, and Effects. Let's go ahead and turn it off for now. Let's go to our rectangle here. I'm going to go ahead and give it a color, and we're going to add a stroke. We'll talk more about how to do this in an upcoming lesson, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and add a 3-point stroke for now so we can see what's going on. And when we resize our rectangle, our stroke stays at 3 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Control or Command and the letter Z. And I'm going to go back to Preferences with Command or Control and the letter K. And let's go ahead and turn Scale, Strokes, and Effects back on. And let's watch what happens to our stroke when we resize it this time. So I'm going to go ahead and resize it larger. And we can see that the stroke has more than doubled because it was resized and we had Scale, Strokes, and Effects turned on. So Scale, Strokes, and Effects preference settings will either constrain the size of your effect, and it's not just limited to strokes. If it's turned off, it will resize or scale your effect if it's turned on. So for most projects, I prefer to have the stroke stay the size I intended even after resizing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to Preferences, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. So just remember, in the future when you're working with effects and you're resizing, you have to decide if you want the effect to stay the same or to scale with your resize. That's entirely up to you. So in addition to General, there are 12 more types of preference settings. Again, because some of these are dependent on what you're doing, we're not going to go through all of them at this time. We'll refer back to those when we get to that point in the course. So just a quick note, if your preference options doesn't look like this here and you have maybe more or less options than what I'm showing here, that's because you're using a different version of Illustrator. This lesson was recorded with Illustrator CC that was released in November of 2015. So just keep that in mind. If you're using a different version of Illustrator, then all the options here may be a little bit different from what you're seeing on your version. Let's take a look at the Units section. And Units is an important preference setting, and you may have to change this depending on the project you're working on. So right here under General, we have a bunch of different options. And those options include points, picas, inches, millimeters, centimeters, and pixels. Oh my, that's a lot of different options. So which one do you choose? Well, pixels are for the web, of course, and then the others are for print. It really depends on the project and your own personal preference, and sometimes based on where you live. In the US, we prefer to use points, picas, or inches, and in Europe or Canada, you may prefer to use the metric system instead. It all depends on your own personal preference and the project. If you prefer one over another, you can set the default here, and every time you open a new document, that unit will be used. Anytime you need to change it, just use your keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and your comma key. If we come up to the menu here, we can see that Units does have its own keyboard shortcut. That's because you may need to change that throughout the project depending on what you're working on. So Command or Control and your comma key will take you right to the Units preferences settings. Another important preference setting I want to mention, and this is going to help speed up the performance of Illustrator, and that is plugins and scratch disks. So what is a scratch disk? Well, if we click on secondary, you're going to see a list of additional hard drives on your computer. If you select one of these, Illustrator will use that hard drive in addition to your operating system drive to help speed up complex tasks that you ask it to do. By selecting a second hard drive, you will increase the performance of Illustrator. So if you have one of these, go ahead and select it now. However, if your second drive is slow, you could actually slow down Illustrator instead of speeding it up. So what I recommend is having a fast hard drive like a USB 3, a RAID system, maybe Thunderbolt, or maybe an SSD drive, and those types of drives are perfect for your scratch disk. If you don't have one of those types of drives, then go ahead and leave it set to the default setting for now. Another thing you can do to speed up the performance of Illustrator is to make sure you have the GPU performance options selected. If your computer has a compatible GPU available, these should be selected for you by default. If they're not selected for you and you're not sure if your hard drive is compatible, then just click on More Information to find out if your hardware is compatible with this option. All right, just a couple more things to go over. First, let's take a look at the user interface. From here, you can change the brightness of your interface from dark to light. And personally, I prefer the dark because I like the contrast. And also we have file handling and clipboard. Under data recovery, we have automatically save recovery data, and you can change that to save that information from every 30 seconds up to 1 hour. And we can also turn off data recovery if our documents are very complex. So I would just leave these on by default. And I would also mention that anytime you make a change, save a change, and you can do that quickly with your keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter S. And I prefer to do that in addition to this as I'm working. Every time I make a change, I'll save a change. It could be hundreds of times within an hour, but I do keep my hands on my keyboard so I can quickly access that keyboard shortcut, and that is probably the one keyboard shortcut that I use constantly and more than any other. And then under here, we can change the number of recent files to display. When we first open up Illustrator, there will be that interface in that screen that will show a list of files, and we can change the number right here. And then we do have a couple other options here that are turned off by default, and then a couple more options down here that are turned on by default. And I would just leave these settings as is. I would maybe increase this if you have a lot of projects that you're working on and you want quick access to more than 20. You can go ahead and change that there. And once you're happy with your preference settings, just click OK to commit those changes. And now every time you start a new project, any preference settings that you made will be used in new projects. All right, so that's it for preferences for now. So hopefully you made it through. Let's go on to the next lesson. All right, we're going to take a quick look around the Illustrator interface so we can become familiar with where all the tools, options, and panels are to help us streamline our workflow. So once we have a good idea of where everything is, then it will be easier for us to access what we need when we need it. So let's go ahead and take a quick run all around the interface. All right, let's start in the top left here, and we have a button that will allow us to go directly to Bridge. Next to that, we have another button that will allow us to search Adobe Stock. Next to that, we have a button that will help us arrange our documents when working with multiple files. And then next to that, we have this little rocket icon, and this lets us know that the GPU performance is enabled. All right, let's go all the way over here to the right, and we have a drop-down menu, and this is a list of all the different workspaces. And we'll talk more about workspaces in an upcoming lesson. And then here we have a search tool. All right, this next section is one of the most important sections in the Illustrator interface, and it's located right here. You're going to be interacting with this area a lot when you work on your projects. This is the options panel area, and options are primarily controlled by what you're doing. If you select another tool, then the options for that tool up here will change. Each tool has its own set of options that you can configure for that tool. We'll talk more about the options panel in an upcoming lesson. And then right here to the left, we have our tools panel, and we can actually move this out if we want to. And we can also expand it by clicking on these little arrows right here. If your resolution on your monitor is different, it may look like this. It's set up in 2 columns versus 1. So you do have the option to condense it or expand it as needed. So when you select a tool, it is highlighted and it does look different than the others, and it lets you know which tool that you're on. And then some of the tools will have these little arrows next to them, and that means there is an additional set of tools related to that tool. So if you click and hold on that arrow, you'll get a drop down of additional tools, and this is the tool set within this tool itself. So some of these have different types of tools, so you have other options to help you create your artwork. Then down here we have the object fill and stroke colors. So the object fill is the one on the left, and the one on the right is your stroke, and you can switch the colors on those by clicking on these little arrows right here. And then to activate one or the other, you want to make sure that you click on the one that you want to work with and make sure it's in front of the other one. You can also activate which one is the highlighted one by pressing the letter X on your keyboard. So if you want to change your color, all you have to do is double click on one of the boxes, and then you'll get the color picker, and then you can pick out a new color, and then it will be updated here. And we can do the same for the stroke. If we double click on the stroke, we can then change the color for that one, and then that will be updated as well. And then down here we have some additional options. The first button here on the left is a solid color. The middle is gradient. And then if you want no fill or no stroke, you can press this little button here and it will remove the color from that stroke, and then you will no longer have a stroke color or a fill color depending on which one you have selected. And then just below that we have this little button here that will help you stack your objects as you draw. So you can draw normal, which will place the new object in front of the last one, and every time you create a new object, it will always be stacked in front of the others, or you can stack them behind, or you can also draw inside. And we'll go into more details about these in another chapter. And then this little option right here will change your screen mode. All right, just a couple more things I want to show you. I know I'm probably going pretty fast, but I just want to give you a quick overview of where everything is. But don't worry, we're going to go back throughout the course and look at some of these items in more detail. And then over here to the right, we have additional panels, And again, this can be expanded just like our tools panel, and it's going to reveal additional panels that we can use for our projects. So the panels that are listed here are dependent on the workspace that you select. So if you select a different workspace, then the panel options will change. We'll just keep it on Essentials for now, and we'll go into more detail about workspaces in an upcoming lesson. All right, down here in the bottom left, we have another button that will allow us to share our artwork, our documents, our files, or images, or whatever we want on a site called Behance. Now, what is Behance? Well, it's a place where you can showcase your artwork. It's like a gallery for Illustrator, Photoshop artists, and you can share your work with others. All right, back into Illustrator, we have a little option right here that will allow us to zoom in or out on our document by a specific number, or you can actually type in a number here. If we type in 75%, then it will zoom out 75%. All right, if I double click on my hand, we go back to 226%. So just know that this option is here. You can also use fit on screen if you want it to fit directly in your interface here. This little number here, this lets you know how many artboards you have and which one you're currently on. So we're currently on artboard 1. If we have more, we can see a list of them here, and then we can select it from there. All right, down here we have information on the current tool that we're using, and right now I'm using the selection tool. If I select my type tool, then that lets me know that I am now on my type tool. And then to the right of that, we do have a little option here to show additional information about our document or our tool. All right, so that's the Illustrator interface. Next up, we're going to go into more detail on the options panel. All right, I want to go into more detail on our options panel, which is located right here. We're going to be spending a lot of time here as we're working on our projects. Now, these options are available in some of the panels. It's just much quicker to access our options from up here versus going back and forth with our panels. So that's why the options panel is located up here. It just helps streamline your workflow. Okay, our first two options is in relation to color. We have our object fill color here, and then next to that we have our stroke color, and we can change those colors from here. Next to that we have our stroke weight, and we can adjust the weight of our stroke from here, and we can also do 1/10 of a stroke width if we want something thinner. We also have uniform, and this will allow us to adjust the variable width of our stroke or our paths. So right now it's set to uniform, which is a straight line, and we also have these options here as well. And then for our brushes, we have some default options here, as well as some more artistic options. And then in our library, we have additional pre-made brushes to give us more creative options for our artwork. Next to that, we can adjust the opacity of our stroke or our fill. We can also add a style to our object fill or our strokes, and we also have a library of additional creative options from within here. And then if you want to change your document setup, just go ahead and click on this button here, and you can make adjustments to your document. We also have preferences, but again, it's easier to use our keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter K. And then finally, we have an option here to help us select multiple objects based on similar attributes that we can select from here. All right, so another thing I want to point out is this text here and here that's in orange. Anytime you see something in orange like this, it means there's additional options for that option. So if we click on this, we're going to get another menu with additional options for opacity and for stroke. We'll go into more detail about these other options here, but just know that anytime you see anything in orange, you can click on it for extra options for that particular option. All right, so like I've mentioned, anytime you select a new tool, it's possible that you're going to get additional options in the options panel. So right now we have the text tool selected, and from here I can adjust the font type, the font weight and style, the size, and adjust the paragraph, And we also have 2 items that are in orange, so that gives us additional options as well. Now, in addition to your tools, when you select one of your objects, you're going to get additional options for that as well. Let's go back to a different layer and take a look at this item here. I'm going to go ahead and select the TV, and we can see we have new options up here to help us with our project. So right here we have one of my favorites, which is Recolor Artwork. If we click on that, we get a dialog box called Recolor Artwork. So from here, I can select any color from the object and then change it from within here. So let's go ahead and change a couple. So there we go. We can see that we've now recolored our artwork based on the colors that we selected from the project, and then we can see the change with the new colors as we work in this dialog box. So this is an awesome feature to use when you want to recolor your artwork. All right, so next to that we have another option to align to our selection or align to our artboard, and then we have additional options here for aligning our artwork as well as positioning our project within the artboard, and we can do that manually. And we can also isolate selected objects. And again, we're going to go into more detail on all of these different options here in upcoming lessons. Just want to point this out that you do have these additional options when you select your objects or when you select a new tool. So one last thing, we can also customize what we see in our options panel. If you never need to use, let's say, X, Y, and the width and the height, we can come over here to this option here and deselect specific items that we don't need clogging up our options panel. So you can turn those on and off from right here. So the options panel is a very important panel that you'll find yourself using constantly. So make sure to utilize this area in order to streamline your workflow. All right, now I'd like to show you how to customize your workspace to help you streamline your workflow. We do have pre-made workspaces here that are provided by Adobe. Adobe has put these together to give you an idea of the panels you may need for specific projects. However, depending on your project, you may find yourself not using some of the panels and find that you're using something else completely different. So it's a good idea to have a workspace for different types of projects. You could have a specific workflow for illustrations, another one for web design projects, and maybe a completely different one for projects with large amounts of typography. So creating custom workspaces will definitely streamline your workflow by allowing you to only have the panels that you need for your project. So let's find out how we can rearrange our workspace and then save them for use in the future. All right, let's stick with the Essentials workspace for now and go ahead and customize our own that we can then save for future use. So we have the right panel here, and I've already mentioned before that we can expand this to see all the panels within inside it by clicking on this little arrow icon here, and we can also collapse it. And we can also do the same with our tools panel over here to the left. And then we also have additional tool sets within the tools. By clicking on a tool with the little white arrow there, we get a set of additional tools. Let's take a look at the type tool here. I do use keyboard shortcuts a lot, but if you notice, a lot of the tools within here do not have a keyboard shortcut. So instead of coming back and forth, check this out. We can actually remove the type tool by clicking on this little arrow right here, and now it becomes detached and it's now its own free floating panel. And then you can rearrange that anywhere you want to help you as you work. Now, how cool is that? I love being able to detach different tool sets as I'm working instead of going back and forth, especially if there's no keyboard shortcut. We can also attach our panels to the left or to the right side by dragging until we see this long blue vertical line, and then the tool panel changes to a lower opacity. Once you see that, let go, and now that tool panel is attached to the left side. We can also do that on the right side if we wanted to, and then we can also attach the type tool here as well. So this just kind of cleans up your workspace a little bit instead of having everything free floating, we can just do it this way, and also we can collapse, and now we have easy access to those tool sets within the tool options panel here by itself. But that's not all. Check this out. This is pretty cool. So instead of having these long columns, we can actually take our individual panels here and then stack them side by side. But it actually gets better than that. Let's say we don't use half these tools. We can actually customize our tools panel with only the tools that we need. So what we can do is customize this tools panel for our own personal workflows. If we come up to Window, go down to Tools, select New Tools Panel. We'll go ahead and give it a name, click OK, and then we can drag the tools that we want to use into the New Tools panel. So we'll just click, drag, and now we've added that tool. And then anything that has a tool set with it needs to be detached first, and then you can add the individual tools you need from that set one by one. And if you want to remove one, maybe you accidentally added something you don't need, just click and drag, and it will remove that tool from your New Tools panel. So once you have all your tools set up here, you don't need this one anymore. You can close that out. We'll close this one out, and now this will be your custom tool set for that specific project. So if you have specific projects that you work on that need specific tools, you can customize your tools panel with only the tools that you need. Now I love that because it simplifies my workflow and makes me more productive. All right, so there's a few more things we can do to customize our workspace, and we're going to take a look at our right panel now. We have all these different tabs for different tools and options to help us with our project, but maybe we don't use them all. So what we can do is we can remove them by going up to Window and selecting or deselecting the panel that we want to remove. And if it's not checkmarked, then it's not in that right panel. And if we select it, it will then be added to our workspace, and then we can rearrange where we want to place that panel. We can actually condense this panel with the other panels by bringing it up until the opacity changes and we see that blue outline, and once we let go of our mouse, it is then added to that area. If we want to remove a panel, we can again select from up here, or we can click and drag out, make it a free floating panel. Maybe we want to use this, but we want it somewhere else in our workspace, so we can place it anywhere we want. Or if we click on this little X, it will remove that panel from our workspace. So we can keep rearranging all the different panels that we need for our own specific project, and then we can also condense them to make it easier to access specific panels. Maybe the color and the swatches panel should be together along with the library, and that just makes it easier to access different panels for adjusting your colors. So once you've arranged your panels where you want them, you can then save it. But we can also do additional things with our panels. We can actually stack them underneath each other, and then we can have two free floating panels with one stacked on top of the other. If we click and drag out, it will detach, or we can actually add it side by side if that works better for us, and we can also condense it so that it makes our workspace much cleaner and much more organized. So once you're happy with your workspace layout for that specific project, come up here to this drop down menu and select New Workspace, give it a name, click OK, and now your workspace is saved and it can be accessed from up here. So if we select a different workspace here and then want one of our own custom ones, we just come back up here and then select one of our custom workspaces, and then we have access to that workspace that we created, and this will help you streamline your workflow. So typically when I'm working on a project, I have multiple files open. When you do, each document will be opened and placed in a new tab. But right now I just have the course resource file open, so I'm going to go ahead and create a few new blank documents just so we have something to work with, and I'm using Command or Control and the letter N to add new documents. Every new document has its own tab now, and we can select those documents simply by selecting the tab. But let's say we want to work with two documents side by side. Well, we can rearrange these documents kind of like we did with our panels. If we grab and pull out that document, it will become a free floating window, and then we can work with the documents. But if we click on this document here, then the other one disappears, and then we got to search for it in order to work with this document again. So the easier thing to do is to place it side by side. Just grab your document, place it over here to the left, the right, the top, or the bottom until you see this blue line. And once the window opacity changes, you can release, and now the documents are side by side. So this makes it much easier to work with different documents side by side. We can also stack the documents on top of each other in case we have more than 2 documents that we want to work with. It is a little difficult sometimes, so you just have to grab it until you see that blue line up at the top. So there we go. Now the windows are stacked on top of each other. We can also use the pre-made window layouts provided by Adobe Illustrator, and depending on how many windows you have open will determine how many layouts are available. Like these last 2 are not available because we don't have 6 documents open. So if I select one of these here, then the window layout will change based on that selection. So we now have a new window layout, but we can still rearrange these as needed if we need to set up our documents to work for our workflow. So this is just one more way to help you streamline your workflow, but before we go, let me share with you just a couple more things that are visible as you work. All right, if we take a look at the tabs right here, we have some information here. We have the file name, which is course resource file for this one here. We have the percentage of the zoom, as well as the working color mode, which is RGB. And we also have GPU listed here, letting us know that that option is available and working for us as well. Now, if you're working on a smaller screen and you have multiple tabs, then eventually those tabs will get cropped off. So like this document here, we can see that the tab information is missing, but if we hover our mouse over it, that same information is available, and that makes it easy to access the tab or the document that we need to work with. So having easy access to this info is helpful when working with multiple files and you wish to select a specific one to work on. So there you go, more tips and techniques to a fast and productive workflow. All right, so for this lesson, we're going to learn some additional tips and techniques for a fast and productive workflow. If you want to follow along, go ahead and find your course resources file, go to chapter 3 and lesson 4 to get this layer right here so you can follow along. So what we're going to do is look at all the different ways we can quickly view and navigate around our document. So we're going to start with the magnifying tool, which is located right here on your toolbar, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Command or Control and the letter Z. But we're also going to talk about this tool right here, the hand tool, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Command or Control and the letter H. So let's go ahead and select our zoom tool with the letter Z, and we'll get started. So if we want to zoom in, all we have to do is click on our document and it will automatically zoom into that area automatically for us. And if we want to zoom out, we just hold down our Alt or Option key to zoom back out, and it's going to center based on where we click. So if we want the document recentered and to fit our entire screen, we just come over and double click on our hand, and that will fit the document back into the screen. If we double click on our magnifying glass, then it's going to zoom out to 100% regardless of our window size. We can also access different zoom amounts by clicking on this menu down here and selecting a predefined percentage, and we can also select fit on screen from here, or we can use a keyboard shortcut to fit our document into our screen, which is Command or Control and the number 0. Another quick way to navigate throughout your document, and this is all going to depend on your version of Illustrator. If we click and drag our mouse, it's automatically going to zoom in as we move our mouse. And if we move the mouse in the opposite direction, then it will zoom out. So that's another quick way to zoom in as well. All right, let's take that back. And I'm going to go ahead and select my type tool. So let's say we're working with a different tool than the zoom tool, and we want to quickly zoom in. So instead of selecting the zoom tool while we're working with another tool, we can use our keyboard shortcuts, which is Command or Control and our plus or minus keys. So plus will zoom in and minus will zoom out. So I do use this one a lot when I'm working with a different tool and I want to quickly zoom in. It makes it much easier just to use the keyboard shortcuts. If you forget what the keyboard shortcuts are, you can come up to the menu under View and see the shortcuts here for the zoom tool. So we have zoom in here, zoom out, plus some other keyboard shortcuts that we can use as well. Fit artboard into window, fit all into window, and actual size. So these are the keyboard shortcuts for those. All right, so that's the zoom tool, but I want to talk about something else. The thing that I love about Adobe products is the fact that they provide me and you with the ability to create templates, presets, and more to help us streamline our workflow. So why do the same thing over and over again? If we can utilize tools in our software to do them automatically, I love it when my software does something for me automatically, which brings me to another way to view your artwork and do so very quickly. What we're going to do is save a specific view in different parts of our artwork and then save them for easy access. So let me show you what I mean. All right, let's say we're working on our illustration and we find ourselves going back and forth between different areas of our work. If we're in, say, the type section up here and we're zoomed in really close and we're working on something up here, but then we decide we need to work over here instead, and we just keep going back and forth because that's what we need to do in order to complete our project. Well, there's a quicker way to go back and forth versus going back and zooming in each location. We can actually save our view and then access it when we're in a different view of our document. So let me show you how to do that. All right, first, let's go ahead and zoom in real close on this object right here. I'm going to go ahead and center it a little bit so our eyeball is looking right at us. And all we have to do now is go up to View, select New View, give it a name, and click OK. Let's zoom back out and let's go up to our type this time. And go back up to View, select New View, New Name, click OK. Now, if we want to navigate back to our eyeball, all we have to do is go up to View and select New View 1, and we're automatically taken to that location. This is a quick time saver and will help you streamline your workflow by allowing you to save different views of your document so you can navigate from one side to the other very quickly to get your project done much faster. All right, that eyeball is getting a little scary, so let's go ahead and zoom out. And now let's take a look at our hand tool. So go ahead and grab your hand tool, which is the keyboard shortcut, the letter H. Right, now that we have our hand tool selected, we can grab our document and move around in order to view a different part of the document. We could also use the scroll options down here on the bottom and the sides, but it's much quicker just to use our hand tool this way versus the scroll bars on the sides. Now, another one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts is the spacebar. If I have, let's say, my type tool selected, which is the letter T, and that is now selected, if I hold down my spacebar, then my tool becomes the hand tool temporarily. As long as I have the spacebar held down, I have the hand tool and I can navigate, release, go back to my other tool, and then quickly navigate to another location anytime I hold down the spacebar. I love the spacebar, so keep that in mind when you're working and you want to move to another part of your document, just hold down the spacebar. All right, let me share with you just one more way to navigate around your document. This isn't one that I really use, but I'm going to go ahead and show it to you in case you wish to add it as part of your workflow. If we come up here to Window and then we select Navigator, this gives us a view of our document in a smaller thumbnail size, and we can resize this window as needed depending on our working space. So as you resize it, then the document will fill that area. You can use the zoom tool option here to zoom in, and let's go ahead and do 400%, and we'll see this little red box is the area that we're currently viewing. We can't see anything else, so only the items inside this red box are seen. And if you click inside this box, you can also navigate around this way as well. We do have a couple little buttons here that will allow us to zoom in and out as well if you don't want to use your keyboard shortcuts. But personally, I do prefer the keyboard shortcuts for zoom. And as you see, every time I zoom in, that little red box gets smaller because it's only showing the area that I just zoomed in on. And then I can navigate around the document this way as well. Again, not something that I use because I find my keyboard shortcuts are much quicker versus coming up here and going back and forth. Instead, I'll zoom in and out with Command or Control and my plus or minus key and hold down my space bar if I need to navigate to a new location. All right, so there are a lot of different ways to view and navigate around your document. For me, keyboard shortcuts are better, but maybe you'll find out that something else will work better for your workflow. So play around with the different options to get a feel for which ones you like, and then use those consistently with your projects to help streamline your workflow. All right, let's talk about a couple other view options you may wish to use with your workflow. Once your artwork is done, you may wish to view the original with the color, textures, or whatever else you added to the illustration. So to temporarily remove everything and just see the outline, go to View and select Outline. And our keyboard shortcut for that is Command or Control and the letter Y. We now have just an outline of our illustration. So if we need to go in and make adjustments to the anchor points, then we can easily see where those are without the color information getting in our way. So another thing you may need to do is rasterize your artwork so you're able to place it on the web. You may need to save this as a JPEG or GIF, and you'll need to rasterize it first before you can do that. So what you need to do is you need to rasterize your artwork by changing it from a vector file that's not resolution dependent and saving it as a JPEG, which is resolution dependent, and that means your artwork will now be made up of pixels instead of vector lines and points. So to see what it's going to look like before you rasterize, let's go ahead and get back the colors here with Command or Control and the letter Y to bring those back and get out of the outline mode. Now go up to View and select Pixel Preview. You'll now notice that your artwork has changed because you're viewing as a pixel-based file versus a vector-based file. If we zoom in here, we can see that our illustration is now made up of pixels instead of vector, anchor points, lines, and curves. At this point, it's not permanent until you rasterize it, and I'll show you how to do that later. For now, let's go ahead and turn that off. We're going to go back up to View and select Pixel Preview, and that will bring it back. Another good one to use is the Overprint Preview, which is right here. This will show you what your colors may look like if you're outputting to a professional color press. And another one that I use a lot is the Proof Setup, which is right here. So it's currently set to working CMYK, and that's the default. If you're planning on going to the web, come up here and select Internet Standard RGB, and then check to see if the colors in your artwork changes. Chances are they're going to change. So the CMYK color profile is what you would use if you're going out to print, and that's a good representation of what your colors are going to look like. And then changing the color profile to RGB is a good representation of what the colors on your monitor are going to look like. So it's important to have the correct color profile selected before working, and we'll go into more detail on color when we get to the color chapter. All right, so for this lesson, we're going to take a look at the different ways we can align objects. We're also going to take a look at grids and guides. So some of these options are going to be faster than others, but we're also going to discover a tool that will auto-align for us. But first, let's go ahead and rearrange our workspace. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move my layers panel over here to the left so we have easy access to the chapters and the different lessons. So for this lesson, we're going to turn on chapter 4 and lesson 5. So if you want to go ahead and rearrange your workspace this way as well, you can then have easier access to the chapters and the lessons as you work throughout the course. So I'm going to go ahead and save this workspace so we can come back to it throughout the remainder of the course. All right, now that we have that set up, we have some popsicle monsters here that are going to help us align and use our grids and guides, and we got them in different flavors: ketchup, beet, mustard, relish. I know some nasty tasting popsicles probably, but they're here to help us out. So we're going to have a little fun, and then you can practice after this lesson. All right, let's take a look at the different ways that we can align our popsicles. I want them along a straight line evenly across the top, and I want an even amount of space in between each one of the popsicles. So what we need to do is we need to select the popsicles and then move them into place. If you take a look right here, we have a little circle, and if we click right here, that will select our popsicle for us, and then we can move it into position and try and align it manually this way. So let's try another one. And this could actually drive you nuts to try and get this perfectly aligned. If we zoom in, we can see they're not aligned. So we have to keep adjusting until they're aligned, but we don't know if they're perfectly aligned by using this method. So let's go ahead and zoom back out, and I'm going to undo that with Command or Control and the letter Z to place our popsicles back into place. And let's try another method. All right, this time we're going to align our objects with the help of guides. In order to access your guides, you need to activate your ruler, and you can activate that with your keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter R. I already have mine listed here, but that keyboard shortcut will show or hide your rulers for you. And then to get a guide, just click on the ruler and then drag out, and then you'll have a guide placed on your document once you release your mouse button. You can also select the guide and then reposition it if needed. But right now I can't select it because the guide is locked. So in order to select it, we need to go up to View, down to Guides, and click on Lock Guides so that it will unlock the guides for us. And then we can select that guide and move it into a new position if we wanted to. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete that with my delete key, or if you're on a PC, you're going to use your backspace key, and that's going to delete it. So the reason why I did that is I want to show you a couple more options for your guides and how to work with your guides. So let's say you want your guide exactly at the 144 mark. What we can do is we can click and hold down our Shift key at the same time, and then as we drag down, it's going to snap that guide to the marks on your ruler over here on the left or the right up here if you're doing a vertical guide. And then we know that's exactly at 144. Now it's still selected, and if we take a look up here at our options, we can see that the number right here is 144, so we do know it is exactly at that position. So let's say you want it at 143 or 142 instead. What you can do is you can come up here to your options panel and then manually adjust the position of your guide this way, either by clicking on these little arrows or typing in a number. I'm going to go ahead and type in 108 and click enter. And now our guide has moved into position. So I do recommend also locking your guides once you have them in place. That way you don't accidentally move them or remove them, because they are objects in Illustrator and will act the same way as objects when selected. So the keyboard shortcut for locking your guides has 3 keys. It's Command or Control plus Alt or Option and your semicolon, and those 3 keys will lock or unlock your guides. We can also right click right in this location, and then we can select Lock Guides, Hide Guides, Show Grid, and hide rulers from here as well. If you don't want to use your keyboard shortcuts, you can do that as well. All right, so we can now select our popsicles and move them into place and try to align them perfectly along the top. So let's go ahead and move a few. So this is a little bit easier than it was before, but it's still probably not 100% precise. And although it is a little faster, there is a much easier way to do it, and we're going to go over that in just a minute. So let's go ahead and undo with Command or Control and the letter Z to place our popsicles back into place. All right, this time let's try aligning with grids, and I'm going to go ahead and unlock this guide and go ahead and delete it. All right, so now let's add grids to our view to see how we can work with those. So we're going to go down to View and select Show Grid. And our keyboard shortcut for this is Command or Control and the apostrophe key. So once you do that, we now have a grid overlaying our document. By default, the grid color is a light shade of gray, and the number of columns and grids is also set to a default number, and all of those can be adjusted as needed. So for example, if you want to change the shade of gray, maybe that's not working for the project that you're working on because the contrast is not separate from your artwork and you may not be able to see it. So in that case, you'll want to change the color. So let's go to our preferences by using Command or Control and the letter K to get to the preferences, and then go ahead and go to Guides and Grid. So we can see up here we have guides, and we can actually change the color of our guides if we want to, and we can also change them from lines to dots. And then below here we can select the color for our grids as well. We can change the color for those, and we can also change it from lines to dots. And then the grid line every 72 pixels. So right now we have a new grid for every 72 pixels, and within that little box of 72 pixels we have subdivisions every 8 pixels. So you can adjust the size of your grids as well by adjusting these numbers here. You can also place your grids in the back behind all your objects, or you can actually place your grid over your objects. It's not actually going to print or affect your artwork, but sometimes it might be easier to work with the grids on top of your objects versus behind them. So you can go ahead and decide on that. And then we're going to go ahead and click OK to save our changes if we made any. All right, we are now ready to start moving our popsicles into position. So let's go ahead and select a popsicle and move it along the 144 line. Select another one, move it into position, and we can see it's working very similar to the way it did with guides, but we do have another option with grids. If we go back up to View, scroll down, we have an option here that will snap our objects to the grid lines. Our keyboard shortcut for that is our Shift key, Control or Command, and the apostrophe key. So once you select that, our objects will snap to each one of the grid lines as we move it, and that's much more precise than doing it manually. So we can see these are now positioned perfectly in the position that we want them. So much faster and easier than some of the other options so far. So you may be wondering at this point, why am I showing you all these different methods if there are some that are better than others? Well, it all depends on your project. I do use grids and guides with different projects, and some are better than others. So it's important to know all the different tools you have available to you to see which ones are best for you and your own personal workflow. All right, let's take a break from grids and guides for now, and I'm going to show you another method for aligning your objects, and I love this method. It's an alignment tool in Illustrator that will automatically align all your objects with a couple of clicks. So let's go ahead and undo this, Command or Control and the letter Z to get our popsicles back into position, and then let's turn off our guides. We can do that by going up to View and choosing Hide Grid, which is Command or Control and the apostrophe key. But if you do that and you try to move your object, it's still snapping to the grid. So you need to make sure when you hide your guides, when you hide your grids, that you also turn off Snap to Grid. All right, in order to use this next method, we need to select all our popsicles. So we're going to click on this little box right here to select our first popsicle, and then we're going to hold down our Shift key as we click on each one of the other popsicles, and that will select all the popsicles for us. And we now have a bounding box going around all the popsicles. All right, so once you have those selected, take a look at your options panel up here. We have some new icons. These are our alignment tools. This icon right here will align horizontally to the left. This will align center and horizontally align right. We have align top, vertically align center, align bottom, and then these options here will distribute the space between our objects evenly. So let's go ahead and align to the top. We're going to click on this button here, And now all our popsicles are perfectly aligned to the top. And then we are going to distribute the horizontal center to provide an even amount of spacing between our popsicles. Now, how cool is that? 2 clicks and they are perfectly aligned. But there's one problem. The objects were aligned to the edges of our artboard. So what we need to do is change another option, and that is right here. If we click on this, we can see that we are aligning to our artboard. We don't want that. What we want instead is align to selection. So if you select that, and now when we apply our alignment tools, the alignment is staying within the boundaries of our selection, and we can also distribute center, and it stays within our selection as well. And you can see we have an even amount of space between our popsicles again, but it was all contained within the size of our selection. So what if you want these spread out even more? Well, just go ahead and select one of your popsicles and move it farther out, and then just go ahead and reselect, and now our boundary for our selection is larger than it was before, and the amount of space in between all of the popsicles is now larger than it was before. Now, how cool is that? So as I mentioned before, there are several different ways to do the same thing in Illustrator and a lot of the Adobe software for that matter, and you must decide which ones will provide you with a fast and productive workflow. So as you work with Illustrator more and more, get into the habit of using the same method for applying what you're trying to do. Use keyboard shortcuts as much as possible, and before you know it, they will become second nature to you, and you'll have yourself a fast and productive workflow.